Director of Employment at the Mackinac Center. I think most of you know the Mackinac Center is a think tank, a libertarian think tank. One of the things that I wanted to do when I became the chairman was to make our meetings more interesting. And my first step was to get somebody in here to talk to us about prevailing wage. So a month ago, right after I was elected by you people to be chairman, I called up the Mackinac Center to get a speaker, and they agreed to give me Vince. Vince is the graduate at the Ave Maria Law School. He's a frequent panelist on seminars for dealing with labor relations and a guest on many radio and television shows. And he said he would come and talk to us about prevailing wage. But he said he also wanted to talk to us about the right to work. And I said, well, we've already done that. That's what he's worried about. He's afraid we're going to get complacent. And I said, look, if you'll come talk to us about minimum wage, I'll let you do a song and dance while you're up here. So, if he does a song and dance, just applaud and you'll understand why. But with that, I'll give you Vince Introducio, and I'll see if I can turn this light down.
Hey! Getting in the back, I think I can project pretty well. And by the way, any requests for songs? I'm not really that good. Except, I think I do have a phone letter, unless you had really boring people in the past. I don't know if I can get that much more interesting. But we want to talk about today, yeah, we might touch on right to work if there's time. But I guess for me there's a little bit of a battle over something called prevailing wage going on in Muskegon right now. So with the construction of the jail that you guys are talking about. All right, I want to touch on what is prevailing wage, brief history, some of the laws related to prevailing wage. I want you all to be experts when you leave here so you know what you're talking about. So, first question is, what is prevailing wage? Prevailing wage is a minimum set amount that has to be paid for construction projects. And it's broken up into two categories. State construction projects, that minimum amount is set, well, by the state prevailing wage. And that's created by the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, the LARA. How do they do that? Then they just look at union collective bargaining agreements in the area and they say, that's the prevailing wage. The Department of Labor. This is federal. This is the U.S. Department of Labor for federal money. Basically, monies are construction jobs using federal funds over $2,000. What they do is they do a survey. Now, the survey really only deals with union contracts because the unions are they're the ones that respond because they know whenever they respond, that's going to be the prevailing wage, and if they respond higher, then the union's going to get more money. Now, what prevailing wage is not, is it's not generally the average wage in the area. It's higher. Sometimes it can be quite a bit higher. And we're going to talk about what the percentages are, and I'm not going to bore you with statistics, so don't worry. But we'll get to the differences and the cost savings of not having prevailing wage versus prevailing wage. But first, let's back up and let's talk about a quick history of where did prevailing wage come from? What is it? Well, prevailing wage came around with the New Deal. During the Great Depression, FDR introduced what's called the Davis-Bacon Act. And that's where we get prevailing wage. Now, it was the Davis-Bacon Act in 1931, and unfortunately, Davis-Bacon has kind of a nasty history. When you go back and you look through the record, you look at why it was introduced, and what the main goals were for prevailing wage. The original enactment of Davis-Bacon was actually discriminatory. Davis-Bacon was introduced, and prevailing wage was introduced, to protect the jobs of white workers in the North from migrant minority workers in the South coming up and taking their jobs. So what Davis-Bacon did is it priced those minority workers out of the market and locked in the jobs for the white workers up north. That's the history of it. And if you don't believe me, I want to read you guys a quote. This is from the congressional record during the debate of whether or not Congress should pass Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage. This is from Miles Clayton Algood of Alabama. He stood up and he spoke in front of the U.S. Congress on the floor of the House in support of Davis-Bacon. He said, reference has been made to a contractor from Alabama who went to New York with bootleg labor. This is a fact. The contractor has cheap colored labor that he transports, and he puts them in cabins, and it is the labor of that sort that is in competition with white labor throughout the country. That's a quote from one of the supporters pushing Davis-Bacon, which is made prevailing wage the law of the land throughout the country, and what we're dealing with here today. You can make an argument that the Davis-Bacon Act and its progeny with prevailing wage is actually one of the last Jim Crow laws in the country. But let's put that aside for right now and talk about what does it do, what is prevailing wage. Well, the Mackinac Center has looked into the true cost of prevailing wage, both on a state level and on a federal level. So the state prevailing wage actually increased cost of construction projects between 10 and 15%. On federal contracts, it's even worse. You're seeing upwards of over 20% increased cost, simply going towards inflated salaries and inflated union, what's known as the union wage. Prevailing wage can be considered the union wage. So, and it's not just about dollars and cents. I mean, it makes it harder for non-union contractors and non-union workers to compete. Still, the state and the federal government, with money, with their grants, mandate prevailing wage. On the county level, however, it's not mandated. Most of the counties in Michigan actually don't have a prevailing wage law. Muskegon actually does not have a law that mandates prevailing wage. What they have is, it's more of an option, or more of a recommendation, policy, so they can choose to ignore it. Now, with this jail, it sounds like they may not. Now, some counties have actually gone so far, and this was the first last year, of actually banning prevailing wage and say, no, we're not going to do it. In January, Bay County, one right next to the Mackinac Center, actually said, no, this is raising costs. We don't want to do this. We want county money. We want to get the biggest bang for our buck for taxpayers. We want to have savings. We want to have better services. So we're not going to deal with prevailing wage. Later that year, Eaton County, or later last year, in July, also banned prevailing wage. I think those are the only two in Michigan that have explicitly banned it. Most other counties within the state aren't abiding by prevailing wage. So if it's county money you're talking about, you're probably not going to be using prevailing wage, unless it's a policy like we've seen here. It's only state or federal money. Now, what are the problems? Well, first, artificially increased costs. Even Columbia University, and you all know Columbia University in New York, right? That bastion of conservatism, Columbia, even they say that prevailing wage raises costs too much for taxpayers. It prices non-union contractors out of the market. Professor Armand Tybalt, he's actually analyzed the DOL data and he's looked at the practice. And he has shown that even the DOL data for the federal level, they actually skew it and make their calculations artificially high. They create an appearance of a majority union wage while none exists. So if you have union contractors, and by the way, union contractors are a very small portion of the construction industry, union workers. So what the Department of Labor, what the state is doing, is they're just taking that small minority, and they're saying, well, that's obviously what everybody's getting paid. And that's what really inflates the cost. But it's not like we've ever had an experiment with prevailing wage where they banned it and said, well, let's see what happens. We don't have prevailing wage. Oh, wait, we did in the 90s. In the 90s, a judge actually issued an injunction on prevailing wage. 30 months, from December 94 until June 97. And guess what? During that time, over 11,000 more jobs were created during those 30 months in comparison to other 30-month periods. I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're already pricing yourself out of the market, if it's not artificially high, you can hire more workers. Or the workers that are hired can work longer, and the taxpayers get a bigger bang for their buck. In 2011, prevailing wage cost, and you're all federal taxpayers here, but on a federal level, added about $1.9 billion in extra cost. Just because of prevailing wage, not added services, not added workers. Just because of prevailing wage. The federal government could have hired over 155,000 extra workers for that amount. Or, well, probably wouldn't happen, but theoretically, they could have, decreased spending, maybe, possibly. Try to decrease your taxes a little bit. I know we've all just been hit pretty hard. But let's put that in perspective. On the federal level, we're talking about a 20% difference. So a community gets 4 schools instead of 5 if they're getting it by federal grant under prevailing wage, because of that 20% increase in margin. Or they only can hire 4 workers instead of 5. Well, what does this mean for you guys? Now, let's talk about the jail. What are the cost estimates on the jail? We're talking between, what, 23 to 47 million? It's a heck of a spread. There was the account on that. Don't want to do it in my books. But 23 to 47 million. Let's just talk about the low end of prevailing wage. 10%, 10% increase. So you're talking about $2.3 million or $4.7 million of an increase just because of prevailing wage. You guys can figure out another way to spend that money, or, God willing, save that money or decrease the taxes of that amount. Well, let's also talk about, with prevailing wage, there is their close cousin called project labor agreements. Has anyone heard of project labor agreements, PLAs? Okay. We've had a love-hate relationship in Michigan with PLAs, and I'll get to that in a second. Probably heard that the legislature passed a couple bills banning PLAs in Michigan. Well, a judge has issued injunctions, so we actually do have PLAs right now. But what is a PLA? Project labor agreement is also known as a labor peace agreement. Essentially, the state or the federal government agrees to hire from union-only hiring halls, pay into union benefit plans, and pay union wages. In exchange, the union agrees not to go on strike. I want to illustrate this. Who here has seen The Godfather? Okay, so you know the scene in The Godfather where the Don's consigliere, Tom Hagen, his advisor, flies to California and then goes to the big Hollywood executive and says, you gotta hire the Don's nephew. You hire the Don's nephew, you're gonna have some union problems. You hire the Don's nephew, I'll make those go away. Folks, that's essentially a project labor agreement. Hire our guys, and you won't have union problems. Well, PLA's project labor, those can also add to the cost of construction. About 13% on average. It also discriminates against the non-union workers. Now, remember I said that the PLA mandates that the county, the state, the federal government, that money that goes into the union benefit plan, I didn't say it goes to the union worker or the non-union worker. What happens is, under the PLA, they say, all right, we're going to pay into the union pension plan, the union health plan, whatever other fund they have. So the union goes out, and mind you, under a PLA, it's only union hiring halls, so it makes it much harder for those non-union workers to compete. And it's either the union members or the non-union members that work for a limited amount of time. Well, if anybody's familiar with defined benefit plan, not your 401k pension, but the pensions where you work for a certain amount of time and then you get a specific amount after you retire. How do you get that? I think I gave it away. You have to work for a couple of years, a certain amount of time. Well, if you have a construction project that's only going on for 6 months to a year, you think those workers are going to be able to vest in that pension? No. So what happens to the money? Union gets it. That's the PLA. So not only does it raise costs, but it also harms those non-union workers. Now that's not prevailing wage, but it's basically under Davis-Bacon, it's all related. Now in Michigan, we tried to ban PLAs. We did it once. Judge issued an injunction. We tried to do it again, and just in November, judge issued an injunction. So we have PLAs, and here in Muskegon, we're talking about the prevailing wage. All of it amounts to raising costs for taxpayers. It harms workers, and you guys are getting less services and paying more for it, or less construction projects. So, can I talk about right to work? Or do you want to stay? Sure, that works. Sure, go ahead.
You're a lawyer, so put on your other hat, pretend you're representing organized labor, and tell us what the arguments are in favor of it.
I want your money. I mean, the arguments are that you're paying more, and you're paying what they're calling a living wage. And it really comes down to you're paying more money. And you're paying the workers more money, and theoretically, they're saying you're getting better trained workers, but at the end of the day, you're still getting the same workers. It's just you're either paying them more, or you're paying them more for a shorter amount of time. So at the end of the day, it's the taxpayers paying more. Did I see another question?
Yeah. I think you were referring to Veter's experiment or study where you said that Michigan created 11,000 jobs when prevailing wages was declared unconstitutional. Quite honestly, you know that study is extremely flawed. I know the American Policy Center has been contacted in regard to that. But using that information, a state like Colorado that had their prevailing wages declared unconstitutional would have lost 28,000 jobs using the same formula. Idaho would have lost 4,000 jobs. New Hampshire would have lost 3,000 jobs.
Now, where are the numbers that you're getting this all from? I mean, this is from
a study that was done on bettors, and actually mentioned Mackinac Policy Center in that study. And it's a completely flawed study that you guys are aware of.
Well, actually, no. I mean, we have the certificate of authenticity. I mean, it's been peer reviewed.
Right, you guys gave it, well, I'll tell you what they said you gave it. You gave it the, some award that you would have, right? The guarantee of quality scholarship, right?
Right.
Which really only guarantees that the footnotes are correct. It doesn't guarantee that the actual study.
The way we go through the formulas, the way the guarantee of quality scholarship happens is it's peer reviewed, it's other economists, it's other statisticians. It's not just, hey, we went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and we're going to regurgitate the numbers they have, and our editorial director goes through and says, oh, well, okay, yes, the Bureau of Labor Statistics exists, yes, the statistics exist. It's peer reviewed on the formula level.
Well, again, if that was true then, and I didn't even mention Louisiana, lost 12,000 jobs. So again, that study's correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states lost workers, and you're claiming Michigan gained workers. And I guess I would read one thing, the last thing. Otherwise, you might think this is warranty, but it turns out it's not. The Mackinac Policy Center is right in calling for a rigorous critic of its research. Otherwise, one might think Dr. Veter's figures of 11,000 new, low-skilled, low-wage-paying jobs due to prevailing wage suspension was a guaranteed result of quality scholarship. So they're...
Yeah, who said that?
A doctor who re-examined that whole experiment, Dr. Phillips.
And we're
he's from he's a professor at the University of Utah.
Okay.
That's just one.
And who's funding his study?
I don't know who funded this study. But again, using that same formula, 5 out of the 6 states would have lost workers. So I just wanted to point that out. There's 2 sides, liars figuring.
Go ahead, and you know what, if you go to matthew.org, we have the formulas on there, and if you email us, we'd be happy to look into those numbers for you.
Oh, I'm sure you've been emailed before, but I'll do it again.
Sure, please do. Yes?
Rather than fight over somebody's statistics, all this stuff is available online. My name is Jim Riley, and I did a radio show with Jack Spencer on prevailing wage over the weekend. I had a construction company owner with me. And by the way, our county chairman, Democrat county chairman, Ken Mahoney's back there, and Ken certainly has the ability to help change this if he's so inclined. But the reason that I wanted to see you here, and the reason I'd like you to focus, if you could, would be because with this jail, decisions are going to be made fairly soon. And we need to get, not details on somebody's study or complaints about a study, but we need to talk about what the real costs are. Let's just assume that this is going to cost $40 million. And let's assume at the low side it's going to cost, and maybe it'll cost $10 million, and maybe it'll cost $100 million, but let's not get carried away.
Let's talk about the number. It's 24 to 27 million maximum.
Very good. That's what
Don't
they
get us
say
into
today.
the 40 to 47 million.
Whatever the cost is, please let me finish. It is pretty clear that the additional cost by utilizing prevailing wage is going to be in the neighborhood of 10 to 20, and
No,
I
it isn't.
significantly more than that.
It is not.
We do have the ability to ask you to leave if you're going to continue to interrupt.
I just want to tell you the truth.
Okay, let's go for the low end. Let's assume
Ken,
$1 million.
let Jim talk.
I need to have
This is how
I'll
they
give you a
win.
chance to
This is
reply.
how they win.
But let's see what the benefit is now. $20 million, 10%, so we're only talking about $2 million.
Okay. The simple fact is, this is a policy that interestingly, that the county board agreed to revisit just this past September to make some minor changes. So in other words, it's not a policy that the county is unaware of. It's a policy that the county is clearly and precisely aware of and chose not to change. So it's a policy they voted on themselves. 5 of the county commissioners could meet twice this coming week, tomorrow, Thursday, anytime they wanted, and they could vote to change this policy. So the key here is, and I certainly would hope and I would like to be invited, please, if the Democrats are going to have a presentation on the benefits of prevailing wage, I'd like to hear that. But this is a group that would like to at least outline those policies that are going to hurt and how the county can very simply vote, if they're so inclined, as other counties have done, or to vote not to have the policy to begin with. Unfortunately, the Muskegon County has done that. Our county tells us we're going to have to go borrow money for whatever this jail is going to cost. Our county tells us that we have to have twice the county tax that Ottawa County has. Our county tells us that we've got over 80, 100, it's hard to say sometimes, underfunding of our pension fund. They're going to go out and issue bonds for this jail. They tell us money matters. If it does, this is a way, and clearly no one can argue, that money will be saved if this prevailing wage is not forced upon this particular project.
Thank you, Jim. Ken?
County policy, anything over $100,000 of prevailing wage. I just talked to the finance manager and the county administrator this afternoon, and there's no significant savings by doing non-prevailing wage. They also,
Your administrator disagrees. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, just what I didn't want you to.
Not true.
because, quite frankly, the kind of jobs you're talking about, whether they're union contractors or non-union contractors, they have to bid on the same project.
Actually, prevailing wage makes it's not a competitive bid, as you know.
Why not?
Prevailing wage, because it raises the floor. You can't say, we're going to build the jail for $20 million as opposed to $30 million and pay our workers whatever it is per hour, because you have to factor in prevailing wage, and you can't do competitive bidding, even though you might have workers that are willing to work for less.
I got a question for Ken. The policy says we have to use prevailing wage, and I think they mentioned that there's state prevailing if you're using state funds and federal if you're using federal funds. Which one do you use if it's county money? Do you use state or federal,
State.
or it's state then? And why do we use state?
because you can localize what the prevailing wage is rather than, say, having a Chicago market or a Detroit market.
What's the guarantee that what's the guarantee that the contractor is actually going to lower their bid because of that? What makes you think that the contractor won't just pocket the extra money and not pay their employees what they deserve?
Simple, they want to bid.
Well, they bid on certain
And
terms
see,
as
that's
far as the job and man hours.
that's the problem with prevailing wage. They're going to have to bid higher because they have to factor in what the increased cost of prevailing wage would be. If you take away prevailing wage, they can lower their bid, and that money still goes to the contractors.
There's no guarantee that they'll lower their bid. There's no guarantee at all. The jail might cost the same amount of money regardless, and the worker just makes less.
And you know, we're talking about the Mackinac section. You can go on our website mackinac.org. We've done the apples to apples comparisons: prevailing wage, non-prevailing wage. And non-prevailing wage is cheaper.
There's definitely a wage difference, but there's no guarantee the contractor.
No. The actual cost to the taxpayer is cheaper.
Makes sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
When you, the better study that was cited by the gentleman back in '99, didn't he use metropolitan Detroit wages when he factored in the wage for the total state of Michigan?
I believe he did.
He did. Now we're talking about the county ordinance, which would be state prevailing wages, state wages or local wages from Muskegon County. Not inflated wages from Detroit. I think it's important that everybody knows that that study used wages that are higher than they are in Muskegon.
Well, but
Detroit.
But once again, that was apples to apples comparisons. It wasn't comparing. It was comparing the prevailing wage for the locality. We're talking about Detroit. Okay, Muskegon. Yeah, it would be the prevailing wage from Muskegon, but it would be the prevailing wage from the small minority of union contracts in Muskegon, as opposed to the normal average wage from contractors and construction jobs in Muskegon. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just have a problem understanding because the Phillips study, the guy from in Utah, he took in 3 states, and Michigan was a unique circumstance because they had it before and after.
Right.
And he came up with 0.2% as what prevailing wage raised the cost of construction, and he took all sorts of factors into account, whether it would be weather, spring starts, whether or not the construction had a pool, how elaborate the drawings were. So I don't know if we were talking about 2 unbiased entities, how we can have such disparate results.
The answer is, and I'm not going to, go do you're doing a great job. Go do the research yourself, and everybody's got a point of view, and take that into account. But the fact is, I think you just said it, both studies said prevailing wage raises the cost.
But there's a difference between 0.2% and 20%.
We're saying 2% or 0.2%?
0.2%. And so, when you talk about this automatic wage inflation that's going to happen, and all the jobs that we're going to lose if we do the work prevailing wage, isn't it possible that jobs were lost because the workers earning a higher wage were more efficient at the projects that they did because they had the skills necessary to cover those wages?
I haven't seen any information that you're talking about a talent difference. From the anecdotal evidence that
it's possible.
No, from everything I've heard, no, it's not. It's the same workers.
It would seem to me that accounting should actually publish what it is that they consider to be the prevailing wage. And perhaps by doing that, you would at least have an opportunity for the contractors in the area to say, look, I can undercut that.
Hey, and if you want to, if you go to the licensing regulatory agency, compare that and go on Angie's list. I mean,
But the state publishes the prevailing wage, and the county policy requires it to follow. It is supposed to be localized. I don't know how localized it is, but it's supposed to be localized.
And I thank you for the second opportunity.
oh, absolutely. This is fun.
The states, or the study that he was talking about, there was 3 states that they had studied, right? And Michigan was one of them when our law was suspended. And, the analysis of school construction completed in 3 states during the periods when prevailing laws were in effect, suspended or repealed, found no statistical significant difference between those schools built with or without prevailing wage regulations. In fact, in a number of instances, school construction costs actually rose in Ohio that didn't have prevailing rates. So it actually cost them more.
Yeah, I'm an actual research study. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
you tell us why prevailing wage was enacted in the state of Michigan? Do you know the reason why?
Michigan is just what they're called the mini Davis-Bacon, so they took their model from the federal plan board. I don't know the exact specifics of why Michigan was enacted, or the mini Davis-Bacon Act was enacted.
But again, it appears to me that if in fact people want to argue whether or not it is a savings or no savings, it would appear to me that why would you need it if there is not going to be savings? In other words, why would you need somebody to go out and say we have to have a prevailing wage if there is no savings? At least that would allow everybody to come in and bid at the level that they're going to bid. And so it appears to me to be a little bit disingenuous for people to be arguing for the prevailing wage position by saying, well, it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to be any cheaper. It's not going to be any better.
Tammy.
Okay. Being a contractor and a non-union contractor at that, and owning my own business here in the county, 5 years ago, I did bid a project, and it was prevailing wage. My truck driver went from $18.50, and all he does is drive a truck, a dump truck. He went from $18.50 an hour to $33.75, and I had to pay $3.66 an hour for every hour he worked on that job for what they call fringe benefits. So they can tell me all they want, it doesn't make a difference on the price if you're paying, but it does. And my driver is just as qualified, no tickets, no drug use, no drinking, none of that stuff. And he's just as qualified as any driver in this state. But that's the difference it makes. So it does make a difference. I just want to let you know, and I had to do certified payroll forms that said what days and what hours and how much I paid him, and had to send that in as part of the prevailing wage package.
Well, actually, no, I mean, first of all, you know what, if you deserve $30-something an hour, you should get $30-something an hour, but if there's somebody just as good that's willing to do it for 18, for the taxpayer, you know, it's whatever the taxpayer savings are. But you hit on a good point where you have to, and I thought I saw some heads nod, like, what's the big deal? Of, well, you had to fill out with some forms or something like that. Let me tell you how ridiculous some of these forms are. Especially on the federal level, and I'm actually more familiar with the federal prevailing wage than I am in Michigan. For federal contracts, there's actually basement plumbers or carpenters and electricians, first floor, second floor, third floor. They get different rates. I mean, they're pretty comparable, but it's still different rates, and these guys actually have to clock in and out when they walk up the stairs. Not only do they have to clock in and out, but on some federal contracts, there actually has to be somebody else sitting on the stairs to make sure they clock in and out. So we're not talking about the money to the truck driver, we're talking about the extra money that's wasted filling out the, oh, well, what's the big deal with 1 or 2 forms? Well, those start to add up. And when you have the compliance cost, yeah, this thing. And when you have the compliance cost of that, that's what adds to the cost and increases the cost to taxpayers.
This lady back here has had her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie Dennis, and I was listening to this, and I got to tell you, I am a little, you know, prevailing wage at the federal level, the Davis-Bacon Act. By the way, Davis and Bacon were 2 Republicans, for those of you who did not know that, along with during that era and time that it was passed. Secondly, it was passed directly because what was happening is that out-of-state, out-of-local area contractors were coming in, lowballing, getting contracts, and that money was made there and then it left there. The Davis-Bacon Act, both at the federal level and at the state level, were passed specifically to keep local tax dollars at home locally. So what you're talking about is, oh, we may save a little bit on one end, but you lose all the benefit of the money going back from local workers receiving those funds and putting them directly back into the local economy. So I think a little bit here, we can't be just disingenuous and say that this was a racist proposition done. No, you're right. You know what? The guy who wants to bring a group of African Americans from the South to work up in the North to take those jobs because he can make more money by paying them less, that's almost called indentured servitude. let's talk about what this was back in the 1920s and 30s. We're talking about not allowing that to happen in the North, and that's important here. You know, I just have to, you know, this is you advertise this as a public meeting. And so you got to know that what could be up now? And I look at the kinds of things that are being said here that are inaccurate, completely misleading. You know, the idea is that this was...
Could you be specific with that? Just to help
well,
us
that this was just an FDR issue. This was not just an FDR issue.
Republican issue.
These were two Republicans who passed Davis-Bacon. So when you're saying that it was a racist, and you're calling Davis and Bacon that they were racist Republicans, is what you're saying.
I'm saying, go back to the record, read the congressional record, and you said it yourself. It was to protect the jobs of northern whites from migrant southern blacks.
They, by statement by who? One person? And this is about local jobs now. This is about local jobs and local money. And I just find it amazing, time and time again, that we're willing to protect those people who want to make $1 million, but by God, those people who want to make $20, $25, $30 an hour have a decent living, that they can't do that because they're lawfully skilled, well-educated workers. You know, you're telling me that these workers, that there's no difference between a well-trained craftsman and not. I'm sorry, I think you're completely wrong. In these other studies that they talked about by Mr. Phillips, he is from the University of Utah. What they studied was the state of Kansas. And after 11 years, they went back in and looked at Kansas. And in Kansas, yeah, what they found out that wages for workers and their families and benefits all went down in that state. They saw that it was, you had a mass exodus of skilled labor, skilled workers in that state. What you also had, okay, what you also had were, you know, no significant savings in construction costs. It's been time and time again showed that. So this whole idea is just, it's so that anybody from around this state or around this country can come here locally in Muskegon, bring in low-wage workers, take the money of our tax dollars and run it and see nothing go back into our local economy. I'm sorry, I think there's a benefit to paying people well in a community, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, whether you sweep the hallways in a school. Decent wages are dignity. And what we've seen nothing about attack here is the dignity of union workers and their families and the wages. Do you think $10 an hour is a living wage, for crying out loud?
Are there any other comments?
Think about it.
Question for Mr. Vernuccio. While it's worthwhile for people to argue these things until the deed is done with the jail, Mr. Vernuccio is our guest, and we ought to use his expertise.
Well, first of all, we're not talking about bargaining against millionaires or millionaires. Hey, listen, if they earn the money, if they're that good, good for them. We're talking about bargaining against taxpayer dollars, the dollars of everyone in this room. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about less services or higher taxes or both. That's what prevailing wage leads to. So stop with the class warfare. I mean, it's...
No, this is class warfare. You're attacking hard-working folks. That's class warfare.
Sir, one of these things, you mentioned those people from the South. Do you know that Michigan, our tax dollars don't stay in Michigan. They go to those states you were talking about, the South, where they don't have prevailing wage down there for most places. We pay so much money to the South, all of those good states, those right-to-work states that you have, that you just brought to Michigan, that Governor England once left as a legacy of low wage, trying to bring the South up here, and it looks like Michigan so far as the Republicans have their way.
I hope they do, because there's more jobs, there's manufacturing, cost of living, they're getting paid more, they have higher population growth.
Where?
You know, I hope we do get the economy of those right-to-work states in the South.
Are you kidding? They take more. They take more of our tax dollars to go to the South for their welfare down there. That is a statistic. If you've watched the news at all, they showed where all of that money goes. Now, your company is union bashing all the time.
We're not union, we're pro-worker.
You're pro-worker?
Pro-worker.
Sir, you can't say that with a straight face.
We've actually helped form unions.
You can't say that with a
We've
straight
actually helped
face.
form unions. I don't know. Yes.
Mr. Reese.
Well, you know, we can go on for another hour. I guarantee you, we go on for another 50 minutes. You won't have half the crowd here next time. You know, I don't have any problem with unions. I have a problem with abuse of unions. I don't have any problem with people making profit, because people make profit. That's how they create jobs. I think it comes down basic that we need county commissioners in office, Democrats, Republicans, to look out for the taxpayers' interests, have less government, because the biggest problem is we have more government interface than we need. The more government we have, the more it's going to cost us. So the judge at the jail, they said, okay, it's going to cost so much. 10, 20, 30, I don't care about the figure, okay? Set a figure, you know, and give the people who have, you know, a contract locally, with workers contract locally, you know, make sure that they get the inside, you know, job and keep the job local. They need jobs here. But you can bash this thing around for an hour or whatever, but the thing is, we got too much damn government.
Somebody else here had a comment. That's what gentleman here, yeah. Try to keep it focused on what Mr. Bonnet.
There's one specific point that I need to make, and it refers to his explanation of the PLAs and the associated misuse of funds. Your contention is that if somebody goes on a project that doesn't last long enough for them to be vested in said pension plan, then that money's lost.
Right.
You're completely wrong.
Tell me how much.
The way defined benefits are set up in our organization and every other trades union that I'm aware of, I'm the president of the Plumbers and Fitters Service Trades Local in this area. Been doing it for 21 years. I don't care if I go to Chicago for 2 days for an outage. Every dime contributed via their contract to my defined benefit, health and welfare, whatever it may be from that jurisdiction, goes to me. I do not have to be vested into Chicago's labor union.
See, that's a DC that doesn't sound like a defined benefit plan.
It's absolutely a defined benefit
If
plan.
you're
We
a
have both the 401k. You're telling me what my pension is. Seriously?
I'm asking you, for a non-union worker, they get that money back? I haven't seen that.
We're talking project labor agreements. Your contention is that non-union workers aren't going to be on those projects.
They have to go through union hiring halls.
No, that's what you're saying is exactly that on a PLA job, you're not going to have non-union workers. That's your contention.
No, I'm saying that you're not going to have non-union contractors because they have to go through the union hiring hall. That's the agreement for the PLA. Correct.
Okay, and if you got non-union workers, they're not coming through a union hiring hall. So you're not going to have non-union workers.
What happens to the money that's put into the union benefit plan for the non-union worker that only works 3 months?
That non-union worker's not going to be there if he's hired through a union hall, through a hiring hall. He's not going to be there.
But what happens to the money that's put into the benefit plan?
If he's not there, there's no money put into the benefit plan.
This lady here said that
If they're put in on an per-hour worked basis, it's not a blanket, we're going to throw so much money in. For every hour I work, there is a defined sum of money put towards my defined pension plan. There's some put towards benefits. That specific assertion you made, that that money goes to me as a labor boss or whomever else you think it goes to.
No, it goes
it's
to
completely
the
erroneous.
pension plan, but it doesn't go to the worker.
You're
If the
twisting
worker is not
facts is what you're doing. You're saying on one hand that the non-union workers are going to be there. This is very specific. You asked me to be specific.
And I haven't interrupted you yet.
I appreciate
I'm just
it.
making
I'm
sure
gonna
that nobody else
appreciate
can
it.
speak.
But contention being what it is, if he's going to make an assertion like that and say that these organizations are stealing money, you better have
I
facts.
didn't say stealing money, I said that the worker is not getting the money put into the defined benefit plan. If he's a non-union worker hired with the union hiring hall because of the PLA, the money goes to the union pension plan. If the worker hasn't vested, is not vested in that pension plan, he's not going to see that money.
Okay, stop for a moment, everybody. Is there anything that has to be said that hasn't already been said? This gentleman had a good point until he followed those rules. This gentleman back here.
And you talked, this actually goes back to your county commissioners in Muskegon, right? Are there any counties that the Mackinac Center approached to eliminate the prevailing wage and told the Mackinac Center, no, we're going to keep prevailing wage?
No, I'm not sure.
And I want you to understand, the Mackinac Center did not come to me.
That's fine.
I went to the Mackinac Center.
I asked the Mackinac Center.
And I'll be honest, I'm not sure.
Has the Mackinac Center themselves gone to any counties?
I'm not sure.
Well, they have, and counties across the state have told them no. The Mackinac Center threatened to sue Bay County. The county commissioners caved. In Saginaw County, I was at the meeting. The county commissioners told the Mackinac Center, we're not going to cave, take us to court. We're keeping our prevailing wage. It's a value to the community. I just wanted to share that information, that's all.
Thank you.
Because it needs to be, that also needs to be said.
Mr. Fink, if you have a local prevailing wage, like we're talking about for this project, and they say part of the benefit, and I'm just asking a question here, part of the benefit they say is that it keeps the money local. How does that ensure that the money stays local? Can a union come from a different area? Can they come out of Chicago?
Here, I think that this is the answer. I don't know, Ken, but just logic would say this.
What you do?
That if I have to pay the same when I get here, I'm not likely to bring the workers in from outside. That's probably the logic of making local hires. I don't know the answer to your question. That's just a quick thought. Yes, sir.
I guess I'd just like to make a comment that I think as we have all these discussions, we should all think about ourselves as a community and what are we going to do for the community. Because when we do outreach and we go to other states and we bring companies in, let's not forget about the local business owner, the woman back here that owns her business, and the local worker. I mean, if it's all about workers, yes, they are taxpayers in the area, and we are one community in Muskegon County and every other county in the United States. And I think rather than trying to race to the bottom at times, we need to look at each other and say, let's do the right thing. So let's sprinkle a little bit of that on everything we're thinking about and talking about here today. And remember that everyone that owns a business, they're people too. The workers out there, they're people also. You say you're for the workers. Let's think about all that as we go forward.
As a yes or no, I'm not asking for another discourse.
Sure.
Your conclusion is that we should have a prevailing wage rule?
I believe we should.
Yes, sir, you.
I'm Owen Schroeder, retired carpenter out of Local 100. I'm on a pension, so a lot of you people won't appreciate that. The last 10 years of my career, I was a project superintendent. I ran prevailing wage jobs as well as other jobs. On the prevailing wage jobs...
Yeah, speak up, sir. We don't have a complaint.
All right. On the prevailing wage job, and you're probably a minority contractor.
Nope.
Sir? Should, sir. Thanks, Mike. I don't want to get too involved here, but on the non-union worker on the prevailing wage job, okay, let's start with the union. It's business as usual for a union worker on a prevailing wage job because union workers' pay is the area standard. When you go to a non-union worker, that worker gets benefits, and instead of his benefits going into the union, they go right on his check. That's probably why your worker went to $38 or whatever it was. The non-union workers, they love prevailing wage jobs because they're getting a lot more money than they normally do. Now, you're going to think I'm bashing the non-union, but it's a fact that the union members are better trained, in my estimation, because I've worked around the boat. When you get a non-union worker, you have no guarantee that he's trained in any which way, shape, or form, especially with a carpenter. Anybody can pick up a hammer. That might be the guy's brother-in-law. He's out of work. Okay, you're going on this prevailing wage job.
Remember my rule about not repeating things that have already been said.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that, and as far as Vincent, you're saying that it inflates the cost. The union scale is defined. It doesn't go up just because there's a prevailing wage job in the area. It's a set standard in each area, and they don't inflate that because there's a prevailing wage job. You indicated that they don't.
I said the prevailing wage jobs were inflated because it's not the average wage of the area, but...
You'd have a hard time getting the average wage of an area, especially when you look at the non-union sector. Their wages are all over the map, and no offense to anybody, but they'd be paying minimum wage if they could get away with it.
And they wouldn't get the quality of work. So, and you know what it is, the quality of work. And if the union workers are working faster, harder and are more qualified, they should get the job. Say they deserve to get paid more if they can't.
Well, prevailing wage, like right to work, it's almost a right to work entity because the non-union worker now gets the same rate that a union worker does, the area standard. So what do you want? Do you want the guy who's a trained professional, or do you want the guy who's just in a part-time getting the same wage? Choose.
I want competition. And you know what? I'm going to make you guys like me even less. I'm an attorney. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example I'm going to give you an example from the legal world. Okay? You have attorneys making $400 an hour, and you have one of the more experienced attorneys. You have a new attorney making $200 an hour. Right off the bat, you say, "Who do you want?" Well, I want to save some money. I'll go with the $200 an hour. Well, if the guy who's drafting your whatever it is, your will or your contract, who's making $200 an hour, takes 6 hours or 7 hours, versus the guy that's making $400 an hour, taking 2 hours, then you just lost money. Okay, and prevailing wage and if the union wage and the union trained workers would do better, would do the job quicker, more efficiently, then yeah, there's a reason to pay them more. But that's not what prevailing wage is. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a point. And I've heard a lot in the last 25 minutes. People were talking about, we've got to think about the workers and all of these different things. And I agree, we do. But I'd like to put out a little bit be a proponent for the taxpayers. I've got friends and neighbors right now that are living week to week, holding garage sales, auctioning off their goods, haven't had work in 3 and 4 years. Okay? But they're still getting hit with taxes. Okay? Their taxes haven't gone down. As a matter of fact, their taxes are going up. All right? We have to start thinking about the value that we get for the taxpayers' money. And if we can reduce the amount of money that is going to be spent, there ought to be ample consideration about that. And that's what people are losing in this. Everybody talks about everybody else, but there are a lot of hard-working people in Muskegon that are paying taxes, and we can't afford just to throw our money out just because somebody wants to have an extra $15 an hour. We can't do that. We are broke. We are broke.
It is about 7 o'clock. We have a long agenda. I want to thank you, Vince, for coming. Do you have any final words?
Well, if you want more information, or you want to debate, or you want to shoot emails back and forth, I can forward them to someone much more knowledgeable with statistics than I am. Like I said, I'm a dirty attorney. Sorry about that. But we have our economists, James Holman and Michael Fay, who can go and talk about the coefficients and the formulas much more eloquently than I can. They're at mackinac.org. You can find, I think we all got Jack Spencer's piece from Michigan Capital Confidential dealing with the jail and how prevailing wage is going to affect the jail. See that's on Michigan Capital Confidential, mackinac.org. Go there if you have any questions. My email's on there, my phone number's on there. I'd love to continue debating, and if we're talking about formulas and stuff like that, I'd love to pass you on to somebody that's a lot more intelligent than I am on that. So hey, thanks for having me. This was fun, and hope we can keep the conversation going.
I want to thank you, members of the public, for coming and for having this discussion in a dignified way. I want to thank Ken for coming. Ken Mahoney, my county commissioner, but he left. But anyway.
He was off to another meeting.
What?
He was off to Dalton Township. He didn't just abscond us. He had a meeting at Dalton Township.
All right. Anyway, all of you came to discuss this. You gave a lively meeting, and I appreciate it. I hope we all learned something.
Cancel the jail.
For the rest of the meeting, I'm going to ask that the comments only come from members of the executive committee. Anybody else is entitled to go around.
With people, being run out of their houses, and economy turn, why are we talking about a new jail?
When you ask,
why are we talking about a new jail?
well, that's not pertinent to the discussion we have before us, and I don't know the answer to your question. Yeah.
How's he doing? Happy, healthy.
We're adjourned until 5 after 7 by this clock. When we come back, we're going to discuss this resolution.
I've been a carpenter for 18 years, and for that gentleman to say that there's a lesser quality of work, I've worked side by side, you know, on the same project, on different buildings with union workers. We were done in half the time, and a lot less cost. There was no lack of quality in the inspector. I was going to disagree with that, but I thought it might cause a little
criticism. Slideshow. It wasn't really points right there, you can be there and write it down, you know, then we can look it up later if we want to review it.
Yeah, it's all on that. Well, there, you know, there you go. I would think you could make the presentation with indisputable facts. Yeah. Well, with statistics, whatever you want statistics, I guess. Yeah. So both sides, you know, both sides, they have their study data. We use the somewhere. Yeah. Well, I'm a facts kind of a guy. We use the government data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS data, and that's how we get our figures. Prevailing wage. That's where we got the 13, you know, 10-15% in Michigan and 20%. So who funds the Mackinac Center? We have individual and corporate donors from all over the country. Mostly it's actually individual donors. I don't do development, so.
Hey, Holly, how are you? Good to see you. Good to see you too.